Have you ever struggled to remember games from your childhood? When I was younger, I spent a lot of my time watching other people play games. I used to click endlessly through YouTube and watch Let's Plays on all kinds of weird stuff. It was my main method of figuring out what had to be on the Christmas list that year. One day I stumbled across a game that was really strange. When I tried to remember what it was, all I could remember about the game was that it kinda scared me. Though the more I thought about it, bits and pieces of it started coming back to me. I remember the game's narrator was a woman that spoke slowly in a hushed voice. I remember the game's levels feeling surreal and lonely. I remembered this big rock with a giant glowing symbol on it. It was such a bizarre game. I thought that if I looked online I'd find so much buzz about it, but surprisingly the game was pretty obscure. Then, after searching for a few days, I finally found it. This is Trauma begins with a group of people all heading out for the night. On the way to their destination, they get into a car crash. The story focuses on a young woman involved in the crash as she recovers in the hospital. Each level is one of the woman's dreams she experiences while recovering. Within each dream, you're able to dig deeper into her psyche and discover various aspects of her identity. There are 4 levels to play through, and each of them feels so liminal. Each level feels equal parts nostalgic and unnerving. Instead of navigating through a 3D world, the environment is presented to you as a series of photographs. I think the realism goes a long way in making each area feel familiar yet ominous. And despite what I previously thought about the game, Trauma is not considered a horror game, but even so, an eerie feeling persists throughout the entire experience. From the main menu, to the levels, to the cutscenes.
What about your parents?
They used to be my role models.
They aren't anymore.
I don't know. They have aged since then.
It feels like I'm seconds away from a jump scare at times. Your goal in Trauma is to reach the end of each dream by solving various puzzles. As you search for clues, you'll also come across these Polaroid photos. While they're entirely optional, there are 9 photos to collect within each dream. A photo will either depict a memory from the protagonist, images from other dreams, or a symbol. By drawing these symbols, you can navigate or interact with your environment. Solving puzzles in Trauma is usually a matter of just drawing the right symbol in the right place. It's a pretty straightforward experience you can get through in just a few short hours. Trauma feels reminiscent of games like Yume Nikki and LSD Dream Emulator. Games where you sort of just walk around and look at things and try to piece together what any of it really means. So if it sounds like something you might enjoy, I couldn't recommend it enough. Revisiting Trauma after all these years was a nostalgic and uncanny venture. However, even after completing the game myself and all of the side objectives, there's still one aspect of Trauma that I don't fully understand: the story. While there are 7 cutscenes to witness, only 4 of them feature voice acting, and the dialogue within each cutscene is also very limited. The full picture of the story can be assembled from the various clues scattered in the levels. Now, I want to take a deeper look at the story hidden beneath Trauma's surface. I want to take some time to dissect each dream and uncover the clues necessary to piece together this story. It's true that dreams can be interpreted in a variety of ways, but it doesn't hurt to try. The first level is called The Next Hurdle. This dream takes place in an area the protagonist recognizes. It appears to be the place they ate lunch at when they attended law school, though they claim they never came here at night. Your objective here is to rescue the teddy bear that's been trapped under this giant stone sphere. After drawing this hook-like symbol on the stone, the rock will be moved and the teddy will be free. However, upon rescuing the teddy bear, water begins flooding the level, ending the dream. Then, you're able to witness a conversation between the protagonist and a doctor. These cutscenes, the names of each level, and the Polaroid photos scattered around are typically your greatest hints towards discovering the meaning behind each dream. With this information in mind, I think it becomes a bit more obvious what message this level is trying to convey. Let's start with the Polaroids. The photos in this level depict the protagonist during various stages of their life. In the womb, a child after their first day of school, and as an adult working on their college thesis. Aside from each photo representing different chapters in someone's life, there's another commonality between each photo. Every image is described by the protagonist as challenging in one way or another. She describes her mother's pregnancy as difficult. She looks back on her first day of school as being peacefully unaware of all the schooling that is yet to come. And when reminiscing about working on her thesis, she mentions that she almost never left the house during that period. With the level's name and the Polaroid photos in mind, it seems obvious that the next hurdle is about the protagonist overcoming obstacles in her life. The dream even takes place in an area the protagonist recognizes from their time in law school, which was no doubt a difficult hurdle to clear. I never went to law school, but I can't imagine that it's easy. Even the primary objective of this level is to remove an obstacle preventing you from reaching your goal. The protagonist refers to these obstacles as weights, and as you explore the level, you discover that she has plenty of experience with handling weights. After removing the weight on top of the teddy bear, the protagonist has this to say.
I always think that lifting another of those weights will save me. I even hold on to this hope as I'm drowning. Again.
This line, followed by the flood, displays how even after dealing with the problems in her life, the protagonist is continually met with adversity. After the dream ends, the protagonist has this conversation with her doctor.
Do you think I can be back home this month?
Maybe. It depends on your progress.
There is an exam in 3 weeks. I've been preparing for it for quite some time.
There will always be another exam. I believe you should focus on your well-being first.
Am I not doing that?
Despite getting in a car crash so bad that she's been presumably left in the hospital for days, the protagonist is more concerned about passing an exam. I think this ties back into the dream and overcoming challenges in your life. The protagonist has likely spent a significant amount of time preparing for this exam, fully prepared to finally remove this weight from her life. But once she's finally close to her goal, she's swept up in another flood. The next level is called Following Role Models. This dream begins near a giant concrete building next to some train tracks. The sun-drenched area is gorgeous. Even the protagonist remarks how beautiful this world is.
What a magnificent place. Or have I forgotten about it?
Your goal in this dream is to catch a ghost that's been running along the tracks. After drawing a symbol resembling a silhouette around the ghost, you successfully catch the spirit. But after doing so, the ghost shatters and the world falls apart. There's a lot to unpack here. Let's start by looking at that concrete building from the beginning of the dream. When you head up to this building, you can find images of a bunch of different people. The protagonist has this to say.
When I was little, the ghost used to be a different person. I would collect pictures of him on a wall, like trophies.
This collage of photos on the wall show the various people that the ghost used to be, and some of these characters should look a little familiar. Given the ghost's ability to change over time, and the way that the protagonist chases after them endlessly, and the name of this level, I think it's pretty clear that the ghost is meant to represent a role model. One of the photos you can find in this level even illustrates an idol from the protagonist's childhood. The other two photos depict the protagonist building towers with toys, and listening to music for the first time. While the last two photos don't tie directly into a role model, It's likely that these interests determined who the protagonist saw as a figure they could look up to, especially since the idol from their childhood looks to be some type of musician or pop star. But the ghost this time around doesn't look like a musician or some kind of crime-fighting superhero. Instead, they seem to be just a regular man. The protagonist even mentions that they've forgotten who the ghost is supposed to be, since they've been chasing them for so long. If you try to follow after the ghost throughout the dream, you'll end up running in circles as the level loops in on itself. I believe that this loop represents how the protagonist may have ended up running their life in circles as they attempt to capture the essence of their role model. I also think that it's interesting that instead of pursuing their creative interests like music or architecture, the protagonist is now pursuing law. It's likely that the ghost we see now is the one responsible for pushing the protagonist towards law school. If the ghost was someone close to the protagonist, they may have even actively discouraged careers in art or music. When you finally catch the ghost, the protagonist has this to say.
I captured the ghost, but I realized the only thing holding this place together was my own ambition. So I let go.
The ghost shatters, and the concrete building from earlier falls apart. The protagonist says to herself that she's let go, not only of the ghost, but of this place. That man, whoever he is no longer her role model. Another interesting thing to note from this ending is that when the concrete building falls apart, these giant balloons or rockets begin to fly off. I'm not exactly sure what this means, but I interpret it as the protagonist finally letting their more creative side flow freely, given that the building only collapses after she lets go of her role model and decides to forge a path based on her own choices. After the dream, the protagonist has another conversation with her doctor.
What about your parents?
They used to be my role models.
They aren't anymore.
I don't know. They have aged since then.
I think parents are never too old to be role models for their children.
But what if I am too old?
This conversation is interesting for two reasons. One, this conversation implies that the ghost we see in the dream is the protagonist's father. It's likely that he was a lawyer and actively pushed his daughter to follow in his footsteps. Two, this conversation reveals that the protagonist's parents have passed away. When I originally watched this scene, I interpreted it as the protagonist no longer being able to see her parents as her role models because she had reached adulthood and felt she no longer needed a role model. However, after checking the trauma website at traumagame.com, I found this. Trauma tells the story of a young woman who survives a car accident. Recovering at the hospital, she has dreams that shed light on different aspects of her identity, such as the way she deals with the loss of her parents. The text here explicitly states that the protagonist is currently dealing with the loss of her parents as revealed at the end of Role Models. This leads me to believe that the ghost is her father, since the conversation with the doctor has the protagonist stating that she no longer sees her parents as her role model, and the dream ends after letting go of her current role model. Those two scenes being placed so closely together is definitely not an accident. While the protagonist says that she's forgotten who the ghost is supposed to be, I don't think this means that she's forgotten about her father. Instead, I believe that the protagonist is saying that she's forgotten who she's been modeling her behavior after, who's become the standard for how she's chosen to go about her life. However, once she's finally realizes the loop that she's been trapped in, she manages to let go. This level is called What They Expect, another dream that takes place at night. This time we're meant to follow the arrows in the level down a specific path. Attempting to veer off the path only leads to invisible barriers that we can't progress past. After dismantling a barrier in your way, you continue down the path to find that the world loops in on itself. Even after following the path set out for you, things still don't seem to go as planned. At first I thought this level's message was extremely cryptic, but the photos and ending cutscene go a long way in uncovering the meaning. Two of the photos in this level reveal the protagonist's career interests. In one photo, she's playing with a stick near a body of water. She mentions that she wanted to be a plumber when she was a kid, but her parents weren't very supportive of the idea. Another photo highlights her interest in becoming a musician, but again, she felt like her parents wouldn't approve of the idea. The final photo shows the protagonist at law school, and she has this to say.
At the beginning, I was very happy at law school. It seemed like such a good idea, but only because it wasn't mine.
The photos in this level also confirm our suspicions that the protagonist never really wanted to be a lawyer. Instead, the protagonist was convinced that becoming a lawyer was the only feasible path to success, so she was forced to walk down this road. And if you stray from this path, you can only find invisible barriers leading into the void. I believe this represents how the protagonist's been conditioned to think that there's nothing for her beyond the path that she's been set on. However, she's still curious about those other roads that she could have taken.
I wish I could stray off the beaten path. I wonder what is on top of that bridge.
So if the road we're walking along now represents the protagonist's current path in life, why does the world keep looping in on itself? I think the answer lies in the conversation with the protagonist and her doctor.
How long should I expect to stay here?
There are no expectations.
Isn't that what good doctors are supposed to give? Hope? A perspective?
Expectations can also belittle success. Facing expectations, the best you can hope for is to fulfill them.
So, what am I supposed to do?
While the doctor encourages the protagonist to avoid expectations so that she won't undermine her success, I think that without expectations or ambition, the protagonist feels that there's no way to move forward. When you have goals like graduating from school or getting your own house, you have something you can move towards. But when you're being told to just do what you can end up feeling aimless. I believe that this is why the world loops in on itself. Until the protagonist gets out of the hospital, every day is going to feel the same. Even after fully recovering, the protagonist still needs to decide on what they want to do with their life. After the events of following role models, it's clear that the protagonist has let go of the person they once saw as their role model. It's no longer an option to endlessly pursue a career in law. Now it's time for the protagonist to create her own path and finally decide where she wants to go from there. The final level is called The Road Less Traveled. This dream takes place at the entrance of a tunnel under a road. The road goes on endlessly, so your goal is to find an alternate path. Next to a billboard, you can find a hidden pathway. As you progress, it becomes difficult to proceed. You'll need to constantly draw this Z-shaped symbol to move the bushes out of your way. But once you finally clear the path, this happens.
It's one of those dreams that never ends. It seems to continue, even when I'm awake. With every heartbeat.
Despite the dream's wild ending, I think this dream is one of the easiest to interpret. Most of the dream's meaning stems from the name of this level. For those unaware, someone who takes the road less traveled means to act independently by making an unpopular decision. If you choose to take the stairs instead of the elevator to reach the top of a giant building, you may be taking the road less traveled. If we're speaking literally, the road less traveled here is the path hidden behind the billboard. But metaphorically, I believe the protagonist is finally pursuing the life that they've desperately wanted. In the previous dreams, we've seen how the protagonist was convinced to attend law school despite their interests in music, architecture, and plumbing. To me, this dream serves as a turning point in the protagonist's life, as she's finally decided to take the leap and venture down the road less traveled. The Polaroid photos in this level emphasize that this is a critical moment in the protagonist's life. The first photo reveals the protagonist's first apartment, the second depicts her first car, and the third illustrates a new home her parents bought after she moved out. I believe that the link between each photo is the protagonist's growing sense of independence. Now owning her own home and car, they've reached a point in adulthood where she is fully independent from her family. In the photo of her parents' home, the protagonist remarks that she's upset about her old bedroom not existing anymore. I feel like this represents how the protagonist has reached a point in her life where turning back is no longer an option. We may reminisce about our childhood, but trying to recapture those memories is like trying to catch a ghost. When you finally start making your way down the road less traveled, you see Z-shaped symbols scattered around everywhere. This symbol is used to move obstacles out of the way, and the sudden swarm of these symbols indicates to me that other people have attempted to make their way down the road less traveled. However, not everyone is able to make it very far. As you progress through the road less traveled, the protagonist has a lot to say on their journey.
seems I'm not the first to look for a road less traveled. Maybe there is no such thing. From time to time there is a clearance, but it's never comfortable enough to rest. It feels like I'm making a mistake.
All of the dialogue here illustrates to me the apprehension that comes with taking an obscure path in life. It might feel terrifying to make the leap and pursue your goals, but despite the fear, you might press on anyway. The protagonist emphasizes that this path isn't some sort of shortcut and that it's similar to the main road but only requiring more effort. Again, this dialogue shows me that the protagonist is working hard to achieve her aspirations. More effort may be necessary and there are no shortcuts, but sometimes your only choice is to keep going. Then we reach the end of the dream, where the protagonist says that this is one of those dreams that keeps on going, even as they're awake. This seems to represent how she plans on chasing after her aspirations even outside of her dreams. When the camera pans out, we see blood cells floating in the sky, and eventually we see that this dream takes place inside the protagonist's heart. I believe that this moment symbolizes how the dream will continue to live on as long as the protagonist is living. She won't let go of her ambition, not as long as her heart's still beating. This final dream is so hopeful. It's such a cheery message for a game that feels so cold and lonely at times. However, the optimism doesn't last very long. The protagonist has this conversation with her doctor after the dream ends.
Are you looking forward to going back home?
I thought I did. I'm not sure anymore.
Aren't you eager to continue?
Doing what?
You know, living.
I guess not. I'm living now, aren't I?
After completing all 4 dreams, you'll be able to view the ending. It's not very long, so I'll have it play here. After the final dream's positive message, the ending feels like such a downer. Sure, the protagonist gets to leave the hospital and come home in one piece, but that final conversation with her doctor was so heavy. It doesn't sound like the protagonist is happy to go home, and she doesn't appear very excited either. It just doesn't make sense to me. Why have such an encouraging message included in your last level, then have it followed by such a grim conversation and such a sterile ending cutscene? I tried racking my brain for days trying to figure this one out. I replayed every level, re-examined every photograph, re-watched every cutscene. I was hoping to find some sliver of a clue to figure out what exactly this ending means for the protagonist. Then, I finally found something. It was small, but I was prepared to take anything. There's actually one more cutscene in the game. I found this extra scene after finding every photograph in every level and discovering the 3 alternate endings for each dream. Here's the final cutscene. Okay, it's not much, but it's something. This cutscene looks nearly identical to the original ending, but the main difference here are the rocks that appear in the protagonist's home. These rocks are the same ones that appear in the first dream. In fact, they appear in every single dream. So what does their appearance here mean? First, let's go over again what these things represent. In the first and second dream, the protagonist calls these rocks weights. In the third dream, she refers to them as problems. And then in the final dream, she calls them one of her fears. The rocks have been referred to as weights, problems, and fears. While we don't have an exact definition for these things, it seems clear that the rocks aren't a good thing. I had said that in the first dream it feels like the rocks represent issues or challenges in a person's life, and I still stand by that notion. Okay, so now we know that the rocks for sure represent challenges or issues in someone's life. So why do they appear in the protagonist's apartment, outside of her dream? I think the answer lies in the final dream. Remember when the protagonist says this?
It's one of those dreams that never ends. It seems to continue even when I'm awake.
With this line in mind, and the context of the final dream being about pursuing your aspirations in life, I think that the rocks here symbolize the challenges ahead of the protagonist with her newfound ambition. I don't think this is necessarily a sad thing, however. I believe that if the protagonist is running into challenges and problems, that means she's committed to chasing after her dreams. That might sound confusing, but try thinking about it like this. If the protagonist gives up on her dreams and decides to tough it out with law school, the problems in her life would be very, very minor. Sure, she would be unhappy, but she'd be making good money and she'd be able to live comfortably. You might not feel satisfied living in the comfort zone, but you're safe and free of any of the challenges that come with venturing beyond what you're used to. Sometimes I think about that quote relating life to video games. It said something about how if you're running into stronger enemies, greater challenges, then you know you're going the right way. I guess I'm sort of applying the same logic here. The movie gallery in Trauma refers to this cutscene as Epilogue Missing Pieces. With that in mind, I interpret the missing pieces as the protagonist's missing sense of fulfillment and joy. Remember in the third dream when we saw how the protagonist once wanted to be a plumber and a pop star, until she was eventually convinced to do law, despite it not being one of her passions? I believe that this ending illustrates the protagonist finally stepping out and finding her missing pieces. Finally finding joy in pursuing the life that she's wanted instead of the life that others have wanted for her. It might sound like a stretch, but I'd like to believe that this ending means the protagonist is finally doing what makes her happy. That was my interpretation of the event shown to us in Trauma. Again, I really want to emphasize that this was just my personal interpretation of the game's story, so if you disagree or feel like I missed the mark on something, I'd be happy to hear your interpretation. That's the fun part about analyzing dreams. When I wanted to know what the story was behind Yume Nikki, I was able to read theory after theory after theory. It's just really fun seeing how two people can interpret the same thing in wildly opposed ways. I would take pieces from my favorite theories and stitch them together with other theories to form what I thought was the perfect explanation for what's an otherwise unexplainable experience. So don't hesitate to let me know what you think. In case you'd feel it redundant to play Trauma after I explained pretty much everything, there is one thing that I've neglected to mention until now. I mentioned it briefly earlier, but each dream actually has 3 alternate endings. The endings aren't long, but I think they're worth looking at. They're not easy to find either, so you've got your work cut out for you. I think these alternate endings provide additional context to help figure out a dream's meaning. After viewing all of them, I don't feel like there's any ending that alters how I interpret each dream. Sometimes I even felt like an ending further supported my interpretation. Still, I won't say or show anything more, just in case you're interested. Thank you so much for joining me down the road less traveled and hearing me ramble about Trauma. Reuniting with this game after such a long time was a really weird experience, but I'm glad I was able to find it. If you've got any weird games from your childhood, I'd be glad to hear about them. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. Take care.